I grew up in Newcastle and you can't not love football. You've got to do something in your life which you love. If you're doing something that you don't love doing, what's the point?
This week on High Performance, we meet the Brentford Director of Football, Phil Giles.
When you talk about a high performance environment and trying to just be better every day, when your owner is so aligned to that idea and he's judging the underlying performances and what's happening on the ground day to day, this is where we believe we are. What has gone well, what hasn't gone well, and how are we going to get better next year? How much role do you think luck plays in shaping results and shaping careers and shaping decisions? 80%. 80%.
Lucky people, they look for the upside of it rather than the negative. Whereas unlucky people just think that they're unlucky.
I never used to believe in luck. I used to think as a coach, everything's within your control. Well, it's not. There's so many things that need to go right for you to be successful, or can easily go wrong for things to not work out the way you want. No player you buy is ever perfect, but what you're looking for is somebody who you think you can develop. Like our players here are great. They'll come to me end of the season and say, "Oh, are the staff getting a bonus?" They're concerned to make sure that the staff are getting as much as the players do as well.
Christian Eriksen had his cardiac arrest. Do you still do all of the same checks? Or is there a moment in any business where talent just trumps everything else? Just forget about your values just to get the quality in the door?
No, never. Football will continue forever and ever and ever. And to maintain the high standard, you need to keep on changing things. It's about new ideas, not getting stale. You don't want the players coming in after pre-season going, same players, same coaches. Eventually, I think you'll lose a little bit of excitement and forward momentum. I never even tried to work in football, but if you love football and you focus on the desire to work on something that you really love, hopefully hard work will meet the opportunity.
Hey everyone, it's Jake here with just a big thank you to all of our new subscribers here on YouTube. And we've had some amazing comments as well. We had a really nice quote from Reese, who left a comment under the Ryan Mason upload recently. Ryan is the coach at Spurs Football Club. Brilliant episode. He said, "You never truly know what people have been through in their lives." What an amazing guy. And Dell says, "An inspirational, soulful, humble human." And that's the point of High Performance. We are giving you the truth behind the headlines so you can really get to know people. Hit subscribe, please, right now, because the more subscribers, the bigger the channel, the bigger the names. Thank you very much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure.
So let's start as we always do. Your definition, please, of high performance.
For me, high performance is the desire to want to be better every day, to want to continually improve, reach a new ceiling. And we can also talk about a high performance environment, which is hopefully sitting in Brentford's training ground now is a high performance environment. And how do you construct a high performance environment? What do you have to put in? What are the foundations you need to put in there? But fundamentally, it's all in the mind about that desire and that willingness to reach the next level. And I'm not sure you ever know whether you've reached your highest level. You're always trying to get there, the highest level. I'm not sure you ever realize or know when you're at that point. You probably realize years later when you're well down the other side of the peak, right?
So how does a mindset of continual improvement operate within a sport where it's all about the end result and it's all about being judged on the points you have on the board at the end of the season? Football's about outcome. Yeah. Your life is about the process.
So I think you hit on a key point there is about actually for someone like me running a football club is not putting too much weight on the outcome, not judging it based on results. One of the interesting things about football is you go home after a game on a Saturday and then you can turn the television on and on national news and it's got the league table and you're effectively putting on the television a judgment on how you're doing, which at the minute for Brentford's going quite well, which is good. But it's kind of trying to ignore that and trying to take that out there and say, no, that's not how we're going to judge our success. We're going to judge it on the process we're putting in place and whether we believe that will ultimately lead to success in the future, not whether we're delivering it right now. I think that's the key thing to keep in mind when you try to assess how you're doing.
So you're a club that's almost been defined by having a very specific philosophy, Phil. So can you tell us the best story that would give our listeners an insight into how you do things around here?
The key thing that we try and do is try and measure the underlying performances of how we're playing and then be able to kind of relay that to players and to staff members and to keep them level on exactly where we think we are. Probably the best example of that in terms of specific moments since I've been here, which is best part of 8 years, was when we lost the playoff final in the Championship against Fulham. And that was at the end of a COVID-impacted season, and there was obviously huge disappointment in the dressing room. And for me, my job was to, be there in that moment, in the days following, and remind people that result, that one game is couldn't go either way against Fulham, local rivals, very close level. You can win it, you can lose, like a coin flip. Maybe we were slight favourites to pull the game, but complete coin flip. So it's about reminding people and saying, look, we're going to go very quickly in that season, straight into the next season. Remember where our level is. We're already still one of the best teams in the Championship right now. We're going to get another chance within the next few months to be there again. So almost like forget that moment, that result, focus on what's important. Now, no one wants to listen in that moment when you've lost a game. They all want to grieve and be upset, and that's an important thing as well. You got to get out of your system a little bit. But for me, it's about saying, right, forget what happened quickly as possible. We need to move on quickly. The level's still good. That game was a coin flip.
But that's an important point that you mentioned there as well about the emotion as well as the logic. So
Yep.
I get that you can look at it and you can look at the stats and the facts to know where you're operating and where you should be. But then I'm interested in exploring the topic of intuition or feeling and emotions as well, and how that drives your decisions.
So in that moment, in that game, I think few people really wanted to punch me in the face when I was kind of calm and saying, look, don't worry about it. I had a chat to a player called Henrik Dalsgaard, who's moved on from us now, and said, look, level's still good. We'll be back in training in 2 weeks. So the season starts, and next season starts in 3. And my job is to be that calm, steady person and not get too emotional. My belief is that's not my role. But what you do need those emotions in and around the group, in the training ground and all the rest of it, which is why it's so important that you get this nice balance within the collection of stuff that you've got to have a little bit of emotion, a little bit of calmness, and people who are using, looking at processes in a calm, rational way, but then people who are providing the little bit of, like I said, emotion that you need. And Thomas Frank, our manager, has a great balance, but also can provide that. And we've got some players who can provide that because it is an emotional sport, and you do need that to reach the highest levels on the pitch, I think.
I think this is a fascinating area for us to sort of delve into a bit, because you're operating in a sport that is all about the result. It's all about, in my other job as a football presenter, I think we base a lot of our punditry on the scoreline. And, I remember a good example, Manchester United in the final of a European competition a couple of years ago, went to a penalty shootout, hit the post, didn't win the trophy. Then the conversation is the manager's failed. Well, the manager was the width of a post away from succeeding. So it's how we get the messaging right. How do you share that message with people outside of the football club, the fans I'm thinking of in particular here, that you can still buy into a journey even if at times it looks like it's not going in the right direction?
I think the biggest challenge with our fans has been when we've sold players, not so much results. I think I say luck, but the lucky things about working at Brentford is because of the history of the club's not been of great success over many years. The fans are great. They're living in the Championship. They were living the dream, frankly, let alone the Premier League. So they're incredibly patient with us. I think where they've been frustrated is not so much on losing a game or the odd result here and there, because results have generally been good for us over a number of years. But is when we've sold players, we've sold our best players year on year on year, and you've tried to explain to them, look, there's a rational, calm, thoughtful process behind that towards trying to achieve something, which is get promoted. We have to, we're a small club, we're a selling club, we'll have to sell, but trust us because we're going to reinvest that and try and actually grow the club in a slow, steady, thoughtful, calm way, not worry too much about, we lost last Saturday, or I think Thomas lost 8 of his first 10 games, something like that.
Yeah.
And we didn't react to that. It was about, and some of the fans were saying, get rid of the manager, it's all bad, but we just looked at the performances and the underlying training, and the feeling around the training ground was still good. So why change a manager? There's no need to do that.
Would you talk a bit more about that period then? Because I think that, when we want listeners to this to understand why things at this football club are perhaps different to others, many football clubs would have perhaps made a change of manager at that point. Mm-hmm. What information are you looking at? What are you learning from it? How are you dealing with it to understand that results are telling the outside world one thing, but internally here you believe something else?
Yeah, I think we're going back a few years in terms of when Thomas was there, but some of the stuff that is now, I think, fairly standard in football, things like the XG measurements, are things you can look at and quite quickly say, well, did you really underperform there? The quality of the chances that you made. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is create better quality chances than your opponents. That's fundamentally what football's about. Whether they go in or not is exactly back to what you just said before about it might hit a post and come out. And that completely changes, for some people, that completely changes your understanding of what happened in that game. at that moment, and you've got to try and strip that out and say, no, like, did we create high quality chances? Did we prevent the opposition from conceding them? That fundamentally is all that matters. And if you can, we've been measuring that for a long time, but I think that's now, like I said, more commonplace in football. If you focus more on that and the underlying processes that went into delivering those outputs and less about the actual result itself, then I think you can be confident that at some point, things will turn and change, as long as staff keep believing that's true, as long as players keep believing that's true. And that's what happened with us, with Thomas. We lost 8 of his first 10, but there was never a hint that there was ever a doubt that we wouldn't continue with him, and we believed that we'd actually be successful long term.
But take us to the start of that process, because you said there, as long as players believe it's true or staff believe it's true. But at the very start of this, you're speaking a language that isn't commonplace, that you're coming in with stats and facts like expected goals, that is just not part of the currency of language around a place like Brentford. And one of the easy dismissals is, but what do you know? How many caps have you won? How many times have you played in the Premier League? How did you get them to believe and trust in your message without necessarily being able to trade on being well steeped or versed in football?
Well, I think you've got to ensure that you understand the game anyway, even if you haven't played it. I mean, there's a lot of people who haven't played the game necessarily to a high level, but have a very strong understanding. A lot of coaches who've done that, gone on to play, coach at a much higher level than they've actually played at. And I think looking back when I came into the club, some of these concepts and ideas, everyone was fully aware that our owner was fully bought into some of this stuff, and he's a very, very smart guy, and it was so this was very much a top-down approach, and I came in here very much aligned to him and in sync with him about sort of things that we wanted to try and achieve. But what you don't do is you don't walk into a training ground with a laptop and a spreadsheet and go, right, this is what I'm measuring you on. Like there is a human side to it, which you sit down with people, you get to know them, you just have cups of coffee with them, right? You just sort of how do you see it? What do you think? Where do you think we can get better? If you want to be a high performance environment and you want to get better, where do you think we can be better? What do you see? And just sort of have those conversations and see what there's a lot of talent and ability in your stuff. You need to try and get that out, bring that to the fore, and then start shaping that and saying, right, well, I hear what you're saying. I think we can do that. I think we can measure it in this way. What do you think? If we start, you tell me we think we'd be better here and here and here, but how can we ultimately measure whether we're improving in that area or not? And fundamentally, actually, if we do start improving in that area, do you think that'll help us go back to the point of winning it? That's ultimately what you're doing. You do want to win the games at the end of it. You do want to believe that what you're doing is going to lead to ultimately performance on the pitch and ultimately winning games. So you say going back to the start, I didn't come in here sort of trying to preach. I don't think you can go in and preach, things like, right, we've got these spreadsheets, got XG, this is going to be great, and preach to people. I think you've got to, work with people and then start to weave things together into a coherent whole and then start to shape it into one direction for the whole club.
But if we go into, say, like when Mark Warburton was here as coach, and my understanding, and I might be incorrect on this, so challenge me if so, was that you were looking at the performance of where the team were in the Championship and sensing that it almost told a lie, that it wasn't an accurate reflection of where the team was currently operating. Now, I can imagine you go into a room of coaches and you share that insight with them. Mm-hmm. That doesn't always necessarily go down well. So how did you handle a situation like that, for example?
Well, the good thing was I wasn't here at the time.
Right.
So Mark Warburton was manager before I came in. Actually, he was manager who took Brentford out of League One in 2014. Did a fantastic job, and then by that Christmas first year in the Championship, I think Brentford were like in the top 2 or 3. I mean, it was like an unbelievable success, really, in terms of getting them there. And at that time, I think there was. Matthew, the owner, would have wanted to put more investment in and keep going and feel like, let's try and get the underlying performance levels to levels which we think we could compete in the Premier League at, where maybe this has got us. So where we've got to in terms of third is maybe a great achievement, but how do we push it beyond that? And that's where it needs an alignment between what the owner wants to achieve with the club and where the staff are and what they're believing, and that needs to be woven together in a kind of, like I said, you need to get on the ground and spend a lot of time with people sort of understanding, where, not just from the top down saying you need to do this, this, and this, but also understanding where they think they can take the club, where they believe, because ultimately it's the staff and the players who need to deliver it, and then sit down and go, right, how can we take some of those ideas and then deliver it, and alongside this idea that we want to try and improve the metrics, the underlying metrics of our performance this year, so that we can actually compete in the Premier League. So ultimately, Mark left, and then I came in that summer 2015 as part of a change. Rasmus Ankersen, the sporting director, was with me at the time, and we brought a new manager in, and we tried to sort of evolve it, and maybe tried to evolve it too quick at the start, maybe in terms of.
Go on, tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so we brought in a lot of new, because there'd been such a fundamental change in that summer of 2015. We brought in a new coach in Marinus Dijkhuizen, his assistant. He brought a new analyst in. We brought another new coach to work alongside him. We brought a set piece coach in at the time as well, who was Gianni Villa, who's at Spurs now, and bringing such a collection of people in and new signings as well. You learn a lot from that process back in 20. You learn a lot that you can't just throw all this together and then expect it all to work straight away. You do need to spend a lot of time kind of understanding the relationships and the people and what they can deliver and how that's all going to knit together in future. And we found that when we threw it all together, it just didn't work. So we ended up changing our manager after, I think, 9 league games, because there was a realization quite quickly that what we'd thrown together wasn't in that point going to take us forward, and the performance metrics weren't good enough underlying the team on the pitch.
So what would you have done differently when you look back at that period? What lessons did you learn that you'd be able to pass on to listeners?
What did we learn from that time? Well, really, it's about, you've got to really understand the environment and the culture and the people that are already in place, and learn and listen to them about what they're saying, and then sort of build incrementally and slowly. I think that's been the lesson of Brentford. It took us a long time to reach the Premier League. We had this ambition in 2015. We just got the playoffs the previous year. We didn't get promoted in that time, but then the idea that somehow we can just take it from there and suddenly we'll be in the top 2 or 3 by throwing a lot of new players or money or whatever it is at it, just wasn't going to work. In hindsight, what we should have done is probably put a head coach in with an assistant, and then start to build around that, assess that and start to build around that step by step over time. Not always possible. I mean, we did need some players in the summer, and you have to kind of put it together quickly. But moving forward now, the more, in terms of evolving Brentford from this point, the more I can do that we can do that in a controlled, planned, evolutionary way, and not in a radical kind of belief that, we can somehow, skip steps of the process and jump up the pyramid much, much quicker than we can. That's the big learning, I think.
And how did you cope with that sort of perceived failure? Did you see it as that or not?
I think it was, in some sense, it wasn't a great start, because, I was an outsider at football at the time. It was my first job in football, and you get the feeling that people think, well, who's this guy coming in? Thinks he knows about football, whatever. And so you do need to, it's disappointing that it doesn't work quite as quickly as you think. And obviously, Brentford had got the playoffs the previous year, and that was a big success for the club. And then we start dropping down the table there quickly, and you understand that people start thinking, can this guy do it? Or, maybe we need to change it again. But the most important thing there, fundamentally, the big thing that meant that we didn't really doubt ourselves too much was the owner of this club, who's just, when people talk about Brentford and where they are now, and they talk about Matthew and what he's done, I mean, I think they link those two things together, but they don't realise how supportive he's been of the staff who've gone and delivered this over a number of years. Because he's rock solid in his beliefs of what he wants to do, it doesn't transmit that pressure down on me or on, in this case, Thomas, a head coach. He's just a great owner in that sense. He's not emotional. He looks at things objectively. He understands. He listens to what you're trying to do. And so when you make a mistake, he doesn't automatically react and say, well, that was a terrible mistake. There should be some penalty or punishment for that. He's like, okay, well, these things happen. How are we going to correct it?
I'd love to talk about how he runs this place and the lessons that, people listening to this, whether they are working in a business or running a business, can learn from that. How often is he around? How does he communicate? How does he bring people on the journey with him? I think this is a really interesting insight for people, because he doesn't do many interviews. He doesn't sit down with people like this, does he?
No, and he likes to keep himself to himself. He doesn't do many interviews. He's quite introverted in many ways, as I think maybe I am a little bit as well. I speak to him on a regular basis, but but he's not at the training ground very often. He might come down very occasionally to watch training. I think he's very comfortable letting the people run the club for him. He sets out kind of some basic principles that he'd like to see, enacted, and some thoughts and ideas on football. Things like, in terms of how he wants us to be proactive on the pitch. He doesn't want to. One of his big bugbears, I'll be honest, is when you're leading 2-1 with a minute to go and everyone drops off, and he's like, no, I want to keep on attacking. I want to keep on scoring the third goal. I really want to keep going for it and keep attacking. And so some basic things like that. And he wants to make rational, logical decisions. He wants to see the evidence behind the thinking. He's got that trust in us to deliver it, which is invaluable, because it means that you can just get on with it, not feeling as if somebody's looking over your shoulder, ready to kind of have a go at you because you didn't quite get it right. And we all know that as we go through many years of running a football club, you'll make loads of mistakes. We've spent money on players who were people forget because we've had a few successes on players. People forget all the players who didn't work out. I don't forget them. I remember the failures quite a lot. But he's never once come to us and said, "You're an idiot. Why did why did we go and do that?" It's always been a team thing about, right, well, we all bought into it. We all believe it was the right idea. Maybe he had his doubts in one case. Maybe I had my doubts in one case. Maybe Thomas maybe had his doubts in one case. But it's never held against people to say, well, you should don't do that again, because he understands that we're not all deliberately trying to make mistakes, right?
And that's all great stuff. But what does he also do to push you all and drive you on and keep you honest?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure he does a lot of that.
Really?
I'm not sure he does. No. Honestly, not in a kind of an obvious way, let's say. I think he's a Brentford fan who wants the best for the club, and he's just very calm and relaxed about how it's gone over the last few years. I mean, to some extent, maybe come back in a couple of years' time when maybe it's not going so well.
Well, it's easy to be that sort of leader when things are going well, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. And but to be fair, he's never been a kind of a shouting and bawling and screaming when we had those more difficult moments. He's always believed in what we're trying to achieve.
So if we take like a small view, a defeat, right? Yeah. He calls you after a defeat. What sort of questions would he want answered, or what would he be talking to you about?
So I sit next to him most of the times for games, and if we play, if we lose, but we play well, he recognises that, and he'll say, "Well, that was a really good performance. Really good. Really pleased with that." I think we lost first season in the Premier League last year. We lost 1-0 to Chelsea, and we absolutely battered. In the last 20 minutes, I think we hit the bar or post about 3 times. I mean, we were absolutely. Mendy was unbelievable, and he said, I think that's our best ever performance. That's the best we've ever played. Almost really, really happy because he's seen, the underlying metrics are, really good on that game. And that's just invaluable. And then there'll be sometimes when you win and you say, well, we're lucky there. We've all seen results in games where you think, you were lucky there and you'll not. And then there'll be maybe something that's happened within the game, like where he feels like we didn't stick to our principles. And that's the comment Neil made. I felt like we won, but we didn't stick to our principles there. We got a bit lucky. They miss a last-minute penalty, or we drop off too much, or we didn't change the game quickly, whatever it might be. And so you end up in a situation where you're being judged not on, and he's judging it not on the results at all. And that's how we've, when you talk about a high-performance environment and trying to just be better every day, when your owner is so aligned to that idea, and he's not judging the results himself, he's judging the underlying performances and what's happening on the ground day to day, it means that actually people can be confident and actually be faithful to that belief, which I think a lot of us believe is probably the right way to go, to try and forget about the results, to try and look at the underlying, performances.
But there's a phrase you use there about the leader being aligned, and in our interviews where we've been lucky enough to sit down with Premier League coaches like Frank Lampard or Sean Dyche, for example, one of the things that they've identified when things have gone wrong is a misalignment between the leaders of the organisation, and that straight line from them down to the playing staff has suddenly become crooked. So would you take us into the process of how you keep that alignment between Matthew, yourself and Thomas? And so what are the meetings? How regular are they? What are the kind of conversations you're having?
So I will. I'll speak to Matthew on match days and on the phone now and again. I don't really have any formal meetings with him. He's not at the training ground. He's not active in running the club per se. He's a an owner who obviously has a view and will impart his view when he feels he needs to pick the phone up. And he'll also, after games, he'll speak to Thomas, I'm sure. I'm not on those calls, but I don't ever remember a situation where me, Thomas and Matthew ever sat down and had a formal meeting.
Right.
Occasionally we might go for dinner. That's something we'll do. We'll go for dinner and we might invite one or two others with us. And that's part of a social bonding and about being part of a team as much as anything about, right, I want to say this and this to in a formal performance way, so to speak. I will have those more regular catch-ups with Thomas, and sometimes it'll be about what I think, and sometimes it'll be about what Thomas thinks, and sometimes it'll be me often trying to be subtly impart what Matthew believes, and often what it's like when you try and be subtle, the other person can see right through it and probably going, well, that's not really subtle, I can see what you're getting at here, and trying to sometimes be less subtle and just say, look, I think Matthew wants to see us do this, and this. How can me and you go about achieving that for him? Or do we think that's wrong? Do we need to give that feedback to Matthew and say, we don't think that's the right approach to actually solving this particular problem? And
he listens to that?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, exactly, he does. And I think open-mindedness is an absolutely key attribute in Matthew and in Thomas as well, actually, as a coach.
Go on, say more about that.
I could sit down with Thomas and have a conversation, and sometimes it might be something that I know you won't necessarily agree on and all the rest of it, but he would sit and listen and think about those ideas and come back with thoughtful replies, sometimes in agreement, sometimes not. And we'd have a really good conversation around whether we think that's the right way to go forward or not, without giving any specific examples. But he's I think that's something which you don't necessarily see with Thomas. When you watch him on the television, you see the passion, and you see the knowledge, and you see the kind of the detail that he sees football in, and you see somebody who I think comes across as a really good guy. But sometimes with someone who's at that level, it would be easy for them to think, well, I've kind of made it at this level. I know my stuff, and not feel they could listen. And the same with Matthew in terms of the level, he's in terms of his life, what the levels he's reached. But they're willing to be open-minded. I think that's a key personality trait which has enabled them to reach the top in their fields.
So that's really interesting. I'd like to delve a bit deeper into that, because there's some really interesting research that was done on this in a study at Johns Hopkins University, where they looked at doctors that are sued the most versus doctors that are sued the least, and what they found was that it doesn't matter the quality of advice that the doctor dispenses, the difference was the length of appointment times. Mm-hmm. So the more time you give somebody just a chance to speak their truth and to process it, means that you tend to build stronger bonds and relationships on it. So do you do this formally? So when you sit down with Thomas, you almost say, I'm just going to impart this, I don't want your response? Or is it a little bit more natural and organic than that?
Much more natural. I never do that. Me and him will meet. We'll maybe try and have a catch up every week, but it'll be very, very informal. We'll just pass each other and say, "Oh, his office is next to mine. We'll pop in later. We'll have 10 minutes, or let's catch up next week. We'll have a coffee or whatever." But what I do is, at the end of a season, we'll sit down and we'll go, right, end of the season, before you go on holiday, let's make sure we sit down and have just a full debrief on what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, what our targets were at the start of the season. Did we meet them? Why didn't we meet them? How are we going to improve next year? That's obviously aligned to the recruitment process we go through in the summer. But when I sit down and do that process, it's a very, very two-way process. It is never, right, sit down with me and I'm going to give you all my feedback. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. Go away and listen to it. It's very much, you come with your notes, I've come with my notes. You're going to tell me what you think I need to do better. I'm going to tell you what I think, as I explained, what I think we collectively need to do better. We have a very two-way process on that. And I think that's really healthy. If it becomes dictatorial or top-down, I think that becomes a struggle at some point. When you hit more difficult moments, I think it's harder to maintain that strong relationship if you feel that somebody's kind of having, got it in for you, having a go at you a little bit.
So do you have a killer question then that you could share with us that really gets to the heart of what you're trying to achieve, that opens up the way to have those kind of conversations?
I wouldn't say there's a killer question. I think there's a killer metric which fundamentally drives all those conversations, which is, a metric of, are we better this time at the end of this season than we were last season? At the end of last season, this was our level. We believed we were the 14th best team in the league. Forget what the league table says. We think the 14th. And this year we're in position 12 or 18. Why is that? Why? What do we think we're doing right or wrong to have achieved that? Or is it? Or are we being lucky here? Are we getting it all a bit lucky? And what are the things that are going well to make us deliver that, and what are the things that we need to improve to keep that going? Because I think if you sit back and say, oh, it's all very easy for us at Brentford, because obviously things have gone well for the last 2 years, to go, oh yeah, we've cracked this, easy, without really understanding that actually there's some things we've done well, there's some things we didn't do so well, and there's a whole load of luck woven into that, which means that, one or two decisions either way that we could have made in the past meant that we would never have got where we are now. Maybe we never got promoted out of the Championship. Maybe they'll never be sitting here. There's so many things that could have gone wrong in that process. So I think it's not so much one killer question. It's more, this is where we believe we are. What has gone well? What hasn't gone well? And how are we going to get better next year?
We will talk about luck in a moment, because I think that we have a lot of people that sit on this podcast in the chair that you're in, and very rarely do they give enough credit to luck. All of us are very lucky. The country we're born in is the very first thing that happens to us, right? And we're lucky depending on where that is. But before we get into luck, you said there, we then assess whether we've reached the targets we set ourselves at the start of the season. What kinds of targets do you set, and how do you marry them up with, well, we're just getting better all the time? You could finish 20th in the Premier League, but every area of this football club could have improved. So would that be success or failure?
That would be success. If we did everything better and finished 20th, maybe that's, I like to think that wouldn't happen if we're doing everything better. But maybe 4 of our players got broken legs. Maybe there's we played Arsenal a couple of weeks ago. We scored an offside goal, right? It can happen, right? There's so much human error can happen in the game. So for me, it's just looking at, obviously human nature means that we'll look at finishing 20th and get relegated as a big disappointment. Of course, we'll be massively disappointed and upset, and the players will be upset and all the rest of it. And I would probably have quite a big job to convince people we've been successful. But in that case, you certainly wouldn't want to change anything. You wouldn't want to change coaches, change manager, whatever. I'd hope Matthew wouldn't want to change me, frankly. But yeah, that's it's just so important not to get too carried away with results, week to week, day to day.
And will we ever exist in a world? Because I get very frustrated with the way football's viewed from the outside. That winning is successful, losing is failure. I'm probably guilty of encouraging this on the television in my other job as well, where if a team wins a game of football, we praise them. If they lose, then we criticise them. Do you hear, not just you personally, but within the whole set about Brentford, do you have a sense of frustration with the way the game is talked about? And could we all be doing more to change the narrative around football, or is it just the way it is?
I think it's the way it is, because it's an entertainment in the day. Your job is to entertain the audience as much as the game itself. And that's not sitting there saying, well, there was a bit of luck there and that was a random thing. It hits his knee, but it might not have hit his knee, and it hits the post. What if it had gone in? There'll be a different... Well, so it doesn't matter at the end of the day. That's not the job of the media and the entertainment that football provides. That's all like my job, to try and dig into the underlying narrative and actually what really is going on and what is luck and what isn't luck.
Let's talk about luck then. Often people who are in a senior position like you like to tell the rest of the world that luck doesn't have a part to play. It's all their brilliant decisions and their great ideas and setting the tempo and the culture. How big a role does luck play?
So that's really interesting you asked that question, because I had a former League One manager came to the game with me last Saturday. We played Crystal Palace at home. I have a box in the stadium, which I've got because what I like to do is I like to invite or intercept interesting people who come to the game, and I get them all in the box. So I think it creates a nice little environment of people meeting other people and interesting conversations go on. And sometimes we'll get a coach who's from another sport will come in, and I might invite maybe one, a B team coach or whatever, and come and say, I've got this person, come and have a chat. And I think that's an interesting way to introduce people. So anyway, last Saturday, League One manager, someone who was a League One manager until this season, lost their job. And obviously that sparked some interesting conversations about last season. It went very well for them. What happened? Why was that so good? And then this season, it all seemed to fall apart. And then suddenly they shut the door. And you think from an outsider's point of view, you look and think that was a bit. You were the golden boy last year, and then this year you're out the door. And how does that happen? And he asked me an interesting question after the game. He said, how much role do you think luck plays? And I had to think and said, 80%.
80%.
80% luck. like it's just, I think, and maybe that was a slightly flippant answer. I was giving an answer maybe that was extreme to what he was perhaps thinking. I don't know what the number is, but I think it's a lot higher than people probably give it credit for. How much luck is involved in what we see in football, and how much luck plays a part in shaping results and shaping careers and shaping decisions. And he said, "Yeah, I used to not believe it all, but when I lost my job, I was, I called a few people just for some advice and guidance, and they said, well, we thought about you were a bit unlucky then." He was like, "Oh well." I never used to believe in luck. I used to think as a coach you can control and manipulate everything. You want to believe that you can change everything. Everything's within your control. And I said, well, it's not. There's so many things that need to go right for you to be successful, or can easily go wrong for things to not work out the way you want.
So let me ask you this then. If that manager who lost his job last season was at this football club and had the same results last season and this season, would you have made the same decision?
It's hard to say specifically yes or no to that question, but I think the sort of things you look at would be what changed between last season and this season, and which of those factors were in the manager's control.
Yes.
What are you changing it for? Is it suddenly that he couldn't coach the team with the training, with the drills not good enough anymore?
Yeah.
What specifically went on? Did he lose a key member of staff? Did you change half the team? Was the recruitment good enough? What role does he play in the recruitment? So sometimes things can change, and sometimes they can be outside of his control. But then, the old mantra, the buck stops with him. The easy decision is to change a manager. But how many times do we see clubs change a manager, but nothing really changes? They just cycle through managers and probably spend a lot of money changing it, where there was, you weren't fundamentally diagnosing the problem itself, I think.
So where do you stand then on the research that was done on this by Richard Wiseman, so a psychologist at the University of Hertfordshire, wrote a book called The Luck Factor. And he's the guy that's sort of done the biggest study on luck in the world. And what he found is that his definition is lucky people just think they're lucky because they believe that good things happen for them, or when a situation happens, they look for the upside of it rather than the negative, or the opportunity rather than the threat. Whereas unlucky people just think that they're unlucky. Mm-hmm. What's your view on that then?
I think the saying "you make your own luck" is true in the sense that if you put the work in, you put the hard work in, and you create that kind of desire to improve every day. At some point, something will happen, which is a bit of luck, an opportunity will open up, or something fortunate will happen. That is completely uncontrollable. And sometimes you'll have a moment which is a bit more unlucky. I don't believe that there's in this idea that you're fundamentally more lucky, or you believe you're more lucky, or believe you're more unlucky is really true. I think that probably speaks more to their underlying mindset around that desire to improve, and the desire to keep going and keep wanting to develop and deliver and reach a high level, and know that at some point something will come up which is going to take me on to the next level.
So what you need to do then is build an environment here of growth mindset individuals, right?
Yeah.
How do you recruit for that? I think there's some good lessons here, hopefully, for people, again, running their own businesses who want to change the culture or want to drive a specific culture. How do you make sure you're bringing the right people in?
I think, having worked in football and outside of football, I think there's a lot that you can learn from both. I think the recruitment part of football is it's just so unbelievably important that that it really drives a lot of what happens down here, both in terms of recruiting your staff and in recruiting your players. So I think it's unbelievably important to think about how somebody fits in terms of a player, how they fit into the existing set of players. It's also important with staff to think about what personality traits and what characters and what ability do they bring to the table that fits into what you've already got in place.
How do you find that out?
A lot of phone calls in football, a lot of ringing people and saying, what's this person like? What do they bring to the table? And obviously what you're trying to do, so for example, when you build a coaching department, you're trying to build a balanced group of individuals who have lots and lots of different attributes which work as a whole. So for example, some coaches are very detail-minded. They spend a lot of time on their laptop coaches. They spend a lot of time working through clips and showing clips to players and thinking in the details. But maybe their personality side of it and their kind of their extrovert nature is not there. And you don't want to have a team full of laptop coaches and that's it, you'll be missing all of the other important attributes about how you coach players and deliver the performance on the pitch. Same as you don't want lots of coaches who are kind of, in the classic sense, man managers and very, out there and leading people and all the rest of it, but haven't got the ability to sit down and go, right, look, in detail, this is specifically what I want us to do on the pitch, and actually be able to coach that, to be able to deliver a well-coached, well-organised team of individuals. So what you're looking for is people who complement each other well across a team in many different personality attributes, all of whom have share the belief that it's about coaching and it's about development. We can all improve, and the interesting thing about football is a training ground is fundamentally that environment, or it should be that environment, right? It should be the environment where we're all coming here to work and improve. It's actually very different if you think about a football club than I guess all sports is a bit different to kind of other walks of life, where if you think about another walk of life, 90% of your time is spent delivering the work, doing the work, and maybe 10% is spent training and learning and educating yourself and doing a course or reading a book or trying to improve what you do. Whereas at a football club, actually, 80-90% of the time is at a training ground where we're all trying to learn to improve and develop and grow. And 10% is actually on a Saturday where you actually put that in practice and actually deliver the job on the ground. So I think football, in terms of a football training ground, is should be very much a learning environment, and that growth mindset is important if you're coming down here, not to come down here thinking, I'm not here to learn and improve, but actually you're here to work and develop.
But you're in a fascinating sweet spot where you've worked outside of sport in the real world, to use that term, and then you've worked in elite sport as well. And I think people often use that metaphor of sports teams and try and apply it to the business world. But there's a couple of fundamental differences, isn't there? That one, you have employment law in like the real world. So some of the conduct you might see in a training ground, you wouldn't necessarily pass muster outside of that. But also, you've got contracts where you can get rid of people a lot easier in the sporting world than you can where employment law dictates that you're protected. So for people listening to this that work in that real world, and when they're looking to recruit people to join their journey, what are the characteristics that you'd advise, having worked in both, that you'd say, don't mistake that bit? That's the key element for bringing somebody in that's going to add value to your team.
I think that open-mindedness I talked about before, and also aligned to humility. I think if you want to be somebody who can add to a team, you need to be humble enough to come into that team and feel that, right, I'm here to also learn. If you're working out in another business, the person's going in to feel that they're learning about you as much as you're learning about them. There's a two-way process there. So you need to be humble as you go in. I think that's key. And I think a lot of times when I was younger and working not in a football environment, sometimes you can get too focused on recruiting talent and attributes, things, what can they actually do that the business does. So if you're developing software, can they write good software? Yes or no? And that's the thing, right? Yes, they can, good. And a lot less time is spent delving into, right, what is this person like as an individual? Are they open-minded? Are they humble? Are they going to grow and develop? Are they going to come in and stay at the same level? Or are they going to actually be able to grow and turn into something else with us and take them to a new level individually? Or are they going to come in, and we've all worked with people who are maybe, have attributes that you don't like, a bit lazy, a bit arrogant. These are, when you bring people into a business and they're like that, it doesn't matter whether it's football or anything else, you don't want to work with those people. So you need to spend, the thing about football, I think that I've learned, is we spend a lot more time looking at those attributes just as much as some of the more technical skills. Players being a good example, where you might see a player no player you buy is ever perfect. But what you're looking for is somebody who you think you can develop into the next, especially a club like Brentford, you're never going to get the finished final player. You want to get a player who you think can develop, become something slightly better. And that's that humility and that open-mindedness to want to go on that process and actually develop themselves, because you can't force development on them. You can't say, well, we're going to develop you. You don't have to do anything. We're just developing around you. They need to fundamentally own that.
So how do you test for that then?
Yeah, I don't think you can test for it. I mean, it's not like the formal test. I think in football, you've got to spend a lot of time doing back checks around people that have worked with that individual. It's not, it's not a test in a formal sense, but there's certain checks that you can do to say, right, what's this person like with? What's this player been like with past coaches when he's gone and played it in national age groups? What's he been like when he's gone in there? how's he been with the staff? How is he? Is he aloof with the staff, or does he want to, does he want to engage with them and feel that they're actually part of? Just as important, I think that's something that gets underestimated in football quite a bit, is there's so much focus on players and head coach that people forget about how many important staff members there are, and do the players actually also respect them as equals? Like, our players here are great, fantastic group of players. They want to see they'll come to me end of the season and say, "Oh, Phil, are the staff getting a bonus? Are they going to, they're going to share in that reward? They're concerned to make sure that the staff are getting as much as the players do as well." So you need to, so no formal tests or something, but you do need to spend time digging into the character. It's a bit harder, I think, in business, where you can't really make lots of phone calls in a similar way. But the more you can do in an interview process to actually start trying to get into the character of the person and show examples of behaviours, as much as can they write good software, or are they a good lawyer, or whatever it might be, are they a good accountant? I think that's just as important, in my opinion. That's what I've learned over the years.
And what have you learned about dealing with people who let themselves and let you down? I guess I'm thinking more on the playing side at this point, because sometimes players can get carried away with their own success, the trappings, the media interest and things. How do you deal with behaviour that isn't a standard that's expected?
So if it's, I think you've got to understand that a lot of, again, coming into football as a newcomer, I didn't realise quite how young a lot of players are. These are young guys. They're immature. I mean, I don't know what time your mind probably matures. It's mid-20s, right?
24, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot of footballers you're working with, and the ones who are developing are all younger than that. So the question really is have they made an honest mistake? Because we all make honest mistakes, and how do you deal with that in a sympathetic way? When they've let people down. I've had it before where they've let people down. Sometimes you'll go, right, you let us down, all the rest of it, he's a fine. That's what a bit different to another difference between football and outside world is you don't fine your staff in the outside. Here it's pretty normal, right? Try not to do it too much. But I think you've got to allow for errors. You've got to fundamentally understand that the motives behind mistakes. Was it a deliberate act of sabotage, or was it just an honest mistake? And something else that comes up in sort of as an aligned point, I think, in terms of recruiting people, is when you recruit a player, often there'll be an analysis of their character, and it'll be sometimes a bit too binary. It'll be they're a great character or they're not a great character, and that you end up with this binary kind of thing. And what I've learned is that most people are never like that. That most people sit in this kind of grey area of having their faults and their strengths, and often those in quotes not great character traits are manageable, or you can work around it if you understand that person and you can coach them, and as long as they come in and they've got that humility, you can kind of work around some of those issues.
And if someone lets themselves down, do you look at yourselves and go, right, what could we have done better in this situation in terms of our support for them?
Yes, 100%. 100%. It's so important. But if you want to play it, perform at the very highest level, you need to look at all aspects of what's surrounding them, here and outside, and it's just as much on us to help provide that support for them, so that if things go wrong, hopefully to mitigate things going wrong, but if things go wrong, you can look again at, right, well, what didn't we do?
So can I talk about two examples of recruitment? One young footballer, one experienced pro. Christian Eriksen, had his cardiac arrest. It's a good argument without that he would never have ended up at Brentford Football Club, right?
Pretty good argument, yeah. I think that's fair to say.
So when the opportunity arises to sign someone who we all know is a world-class footballer, do you still do all of the same checks to ask whether they're a good person? Or is there a moment in any business where talent just trumps everything else and you just want that guy in the building because he's Christian Eriksen and can do amazing things with the football, regardless of, and by all accounts he is a good guy, but if he was a toxic individual, do you sometimes just forget about your values just to get the quality in the door?
No, never. He's a good example. Thomas had worked with him years earlier in the youth age groups at Denmark, so going back 10 years, he knew him inside out. And obviously being Danish and with a big Danish connection in this club, it was easy to do the research in terms of what is he like. Not that we needed to do much of it. But had he been, in some sense, a bad character, in that binary sense, you should resist all temptation to bring them in. It will be a disaster.
Because?
Because I think the players around him just won't buy into that. It'll create divisions. It'll create, football's fundamentally a team sport. You need everyone pulling completely in the same direction. As soon as you get divisions in there, that's not great. I think they can provide the wrong example to some of the young players who are learning from some of the senior pros. You want your senior pros to be absolutely top professionals. He is, which is great. But then then it starts having a knock-on consequence. I think football in general, it can be tipped between being a very stable place and a very unstable place pretty quickly based on quite small things changing. So, for example, if we had to change our head coach now, if Thomas left for whatever reason, we had to put another one in. That's a point where it can go from being a really strong, stable, good environment to, if we get that decision wrong, to being a much more tricky environment to manage. I think things can change very quickly in football. And so you put one bad individual, one bad egg in there, I think people underestimate how much damage that can do if you get that wrong.
So that's an experienced player. And let's talk about a much younger player, obviously high profile because of his dad, Romeo Beckham, who's involved in Brentford in the B team. Would you give us an idea of how much work would go into making a decision to bring a player like that through the door? And again, at no time is it based on the name on the back of the shirt and the value that brings.
No, well, it was interesting because when we going back to the first week of January, we brought a player called Kevin Sharder in, and it's a loan, but it's likely to become permanent in the summer, and it'll be a record transfer for us. And the amount of media attention we got for that was absolutely zero. And about 2 days later, we brought Romeo in on a loan from Inter Milan for our B team.
And it dominated the press.
And honestly, it was like one of the most read stories that day on the websites and and Twitter, and honestly, and it wasn't a PR stunt in any way, but I wish it had been, because it was a really good one. If we'd actually thought about it. But the thought that went into Romeo is, he. Obviously, we have relationships in football. He was looking for a place to train in England because he's an Inter Miami player. So out of their season, can he come and train with us? We said yes, of course, we'll let him train. But still not fundamentally not looking past that process of it. Is he going to add to the environment as a player, but is he going to add to the environment as a character as well? What's his character like? Had Romeo come in and been like, well, I'm a Beckham, so make way for me, like, that would have been a disaster for us. But he's not like that at all. He's also, like his dad, I think, humble guy, good work ethic, good mindset, wants to work extra hours on the training ground, and sometimes has to be held back a little bit from that. So the fundamental point is, it doesn't matter whether it's an experienced pro or a young player like that, the character still has to be correct. Whether I don't know if Romeo goes on to play for our first team or where he ends up in his career, but him coming in here he still has to be the right character and adding to, he's just a loan all the summer, add to the group while he's here working before he goes back to Inter Miami.
Brilliant.
I'm interested in picking up on that thing that Jake mentioned there, though, Phil, because I'm reminded of a conversation we had with a guest on the podcast that described to us how one of the challenges he'd faced as a manager of a team was keeping people humble when they'd had a level of success. The club that he was at, almost the players outgrew the club, if that makes sense. And he felt that when they started to lose that humility because they'd become established in the league they were in, and players started to go to these other cathedrals of football and see what else was on offer, that's when it started to become a little bit more difficult. Now, I'm not suggesting you're at that level yet, but if you maintain your killer metric of how do we get better next year, there's a good chance that you're going to maintain and keep improving on this. How have you started to anticipate dealing with that lack of humility that comes just from having constant success?
So, well, the good thing is that hasn't actually happened to us yet. The players, honestly, we have such a great group of players. It's and they've come with us, a lot of them, on the over the last 3 or 4 years. So a lot of the team that plays now in the Premier League was our team in the Championship. We recruited them young. We recruited ambitious young players who ultimately, if we, the idea being that if we don't get promoted, we can sell them on, make some money and reinvest. And if we do get promoted, you've got a young group of players who were already at a good level to step in and actually continue to improve themselves. I think you've seen improvement from Brentford over the last couple of years. And it's not because we've spent loads of money changing that starting 11 is still pretty similar to what we got promoted with, but the players have continued to grow and come with us and remain humble, and they're all, it's just hard to explain what a great group it is. But you're right, at some point the bigger clubs will come and try and cherry pick some of those players. With this current group, I don't expect that to be a humility issue, but naturally it provides challenges with us about how we then navigate those changes, because that's not happened to us yet in the Premier League. This is the end of now 1.5 years in will be the end of the second year. How do we evolve the club and how do we get through the next phase of our development, keeping some of those fundamental principles in place, but being able to replace some very, very good players with equally good players, or players who can eventually be equally as good? And how do you do it? And I think this is a key point in terms of a football club, is how do you do it without alienating some of the players who already got you there in the first place?
Yeah.
So I think it would be very easy to, when you go to the Premier League and suddenly there's a lot more money available, is to suddenly throw a lot more money at players and experienced players and big salaries and all the rest of it. And then very aware of the challenge of doing that, and then having 4 or 5 very good players who got us there turning around and going, well, hang on, we were the ones who got us there. Why are we not being rewarded with the big contracts and all the rest? Why is it that you're suddenly throwing all this money in this belief that this new star player can come in and take us to the next level? And if that player doesn't come and share that same work ethic, that same humility, that same desire to improve, and the rest of the players find themselves doing a lot of his running for him, that's where you'll find that the whole culture and the whole environment will just collapse in on itself, and then we'll find some bigger challenges.
What's the key for making that progress, though, and bringing people on the journey? How do you do it? Is it a communication thing?
Yeah, it's communication. It's some players won't come with us on the journey. That's natural in football. Players will move on for different reasons, but I think you've got to first focus on, like going back to the start of the conversation when I talked about first coming in here and talking to people and actually understanding what they think and what they see, and they've got these their own ideas. Is what have we got internally? What can we take? Can we bring people on that next step with us? And who is going to come on that journey with us, and who is going to leave, and making sure that those people feel comfortable and rewarded and highly motivated before we start augmenting that with new additions from the outside. I think that process, again, is going back to the learning of coming in. You don't want to get to a point where you're trying to bring 5, 6, 7 new players into a group and bring it all together all at the same time. I think that's a very hard challenge to do. I think you need to be bringing them in slowly, one at a time, into an already solid group.
So when you said about the open-mindedness is one of the virtues that you have here, and that you particularly role model it in your box at grounds where you invite people in, what other industries do you look at then that have faced similar challenges, and what have you learned from them? I'll
tell you what was an interesting process. We hired a new performance director in the summer. Back in the summer, I restructured slightly the football department and wanted to bring a performance director in, and specifically looked for individuals who hadn't worked in football. So that was almost a prerequisite. Is they might have worked a bit in football, but fundamentally lots of experience outside of sport. And we got a guy called Ben Ryan who was a Brentford fan. That's always very helpful. But Ben was the head coach of the Fiji Sevens team in the 2016. He won it, yeah, in Rio. So he won that in Fiji. He's like a legendary figure. His face is on coins in Fiji. Honestly, and when he won the gold medal, I said, well, what did they give you? Or did you give us some reward, some bonus or something? He was like, yeah, I got a waterfall. That's what they gave him. The president gave him a waterfall. That was his reward. They gave him a waterfall, and his face is on the coin.
You brought him back with him.
No, well, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, he's going to have to move there when he retires, I think, or to Fiji. So he came in and he by doing that. So not so much me going out and looking at what other industries and sports can offer things like, in terms of open-mindedness, growth mindset, and all the rest of it, and what we can learn from them, but actually be trying to bring them into us. Because I think the idea that you look at something and then you somehow transplant it in is quite hard. But if you've got somebody who's worked in, Ben worked in rugby, but he also worked, I think, with UK sport and evaluating other Olympic sports. He's had collaborations with Nike and other companies like that. So he's had this broad range of experience across the sporting landscape, and he was able to come in and work with us and actually embedded in the club to be able to impart some of those ideas and challenge some of those established things that we're already doing.
And has he done that?
Yeah. So like good example would be if we coaches tend to have a certain week that they like to do. So they'll play, if you're playing on a Saturday, they'll like to have Sunday off, train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, train Thursday, Friday, and they play. That's a traditional. Some coaches will do it differently, they'll stick to it. But Ben coming in and just challenging something, saying, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do it different? Why aren't you doing that differently? What should we change it up next week? What can we do in those gaps, those international breaks that'll help? Instead of doing it the same way again, let's see if we can change that up. So just looking at every aspect of the club and trying to say, well, look, in another sport, they would do it this way. They would actually do much of their preparation work for a game wouldn't be on the Thursday, it'd be on the Tuesday. You bring it forward, and how can we help achieve that? So I think the idea that you can look at a sport and then just learn from it and then just automatically bring it in, I think that's quite difficult. Yeah. But bringing expertise in-house and building around that is a really important tool, I think.
I love this idea of diverse thinking, and I think that's I personally think it holds a lot of areas in football back. All I hear about is people talking about, are they a football person? Do they belong in football? I mean, one of the criticisms I get for being a football presenter and then doing a podcast like this, people are like, and it's mainly football people, football journalists, people working in the game are like so disparaging of it. They just send me David Brent memes or like LinkedIn memes or whatever, because it's not that world. But the whole point is there's a whole other world where you can improve and learn from. And I congratulate you for it. I think it's fantastic. One thing you mentioned is a throwaway remark, right? You said, I restructured the football department. Where did you finish last season in the Premier League?
14th.
Okay, so that's your greatest ever season as a football club, top flight Premier League, 14th place finish, and you choose to restructure the football department. Many people wouldn't have touched it. Why did you decide to make even subtle changes?
Well, part of it was because I used to do this job with a guy called Rasmus Ankersen, and he left in around Christmas of 2021. So about 15 months ago. And he went and he's now part of the ownership group of Southampton. So part of it was he left and that changed the dynamic, and I felt that I needed more support and more knowledge. I realised that what Rasmus provided was, me and him did this job together, and the reason it worked so well as co-directors of football is because we were completely different people. His skill set and my skill completely different. And him leaving provided a vacuum in terms of my knowledge around some of these areas. And I felt that I needed, but the club also would benefit from new skills and experiences coming in some of these areas. So it was partly triggered by that. And I think, also looking at myself and realizing that I can't do certain things. There's certain things I'm not good at, that Rasmus was good at, that we need other people to step up and do. And also, trying to reduce the number of people who reported directly to me. Over time, I'd kind of accumulated 100 people, loads and loads of people reporting to me, and I just felt that I, needed to spread that out a little bit and actually allow other people to take on responsibilities.
But that takes quite a level of self-awareness. So again, I think it's a really important area if you'd share with us about how do you go about doing that self-evaluation?
I don't think it's a process where you sit down in a chair and go, right, I'm going to self-evaluate myself now. I think you do have to be to be successful. I think you do have to be very self-aware of what actually you're good at and what you're not good at. And people around you aren't stupid; they know what you're good at and what you're not good at. So you can't kid them. So you do need to. I think it comes back to hopefully I have some level of humility to kind of realize that. I'm not afraid to sit with people like today and say, a lot of the success, I know where we were lucky, and I know what was luck and what was randomness, and where things could have gone wrong for us, and not get carried away by that. I'm also aware of the fact that football will continue forever and ever and ever, and is largely cyclical. And to maintain the high standards, you need to keep on evaluating. And I'm a big believer that you need to keep on changing things. You can't keep things the same all the time. Not just changing the squad, but little things. When we were in the Championship, we didn't have. We had no money really, tiny revenues relative to the other clubs. But when the players used to come back in after pre-season, would do things like, I just want to see a new coffee machine. I just want to see, a new room just redecorate the room, put up some new, just change a little bit. Or last summer we brought in Ben Ryan. That was a change in terms of the performance director. We brought a new coach in our first team group. We just freshened it up a little bit. It's not just about players, it's about new ideas, not getting stale, not the players coming in. You don't want the players coming in after pre-season going, all right, same players, same coaches. Eventually it starts to, I think you'll lose a little bit of kind of excitement and forward momentum that you maybe need to keep going forward, which I think you have to keep going forward. As soon as you stop, you become a bit stale, I think.
Yeah. Brilliant stuff. We're going to move on to our quickfire questions in just a moment. But my sort of final one for you before we do that is like, why football? You had an amazing career before, you achieved brilliant things. What is it about football?
Well, I grew up in Newcastle, and you can't not love football in Newcastle. It's like, I used to go to the games way back when, we were chatting earlier, way back when football, people forget, it wasn't that popular. Back in the late 80s, early 90s when I started, it wasn't that popular. But I used to go to all the games, and then Newcastle became good. And when I applied to go to university, I applied at Newcastle University, and the reason was to keep my season ticket at Newcastle. So I was really bought into it. And then when I left university, I was there a long time, but when I left, I really wanted to, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I really wanted to do something that I was interested in. So I ended up working around in the sports betting industry, which is peripheral to football, but still watching a lot of football, because I think you've got to do something in your life which you love doing. You can't just, if you're doing something that you don't love doing, what's the point, frankly? That's my view on it. And then the idea that I would actually work in football, and that I never even tried to work in football, that was just something that came about, again, going back to luck and randomness. That opportunity opened up through, I'll tell you what happened. I was going to a meeting in my previous job, which is still with the same owner of Brentford. It was his other business, and was going to a meeting, and I was going to get the tube, and on the platform I ran into someone I worked with who's a lawyer who was also getting a tube to the same meeting, and he was a director of Brentford. So it was a thing, and we got talking about Brentford because that was obviously the most interesting thing, and we were chatting, and eventually he started sort of saying, well, these are some of the problems we face and all the rest of it. I was saying, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And he eventually, one thing led to another, and he advised Matthew that maybe I should be part of those solutions, but actually go in there and help solve, which is how I got the job. But it just goes to show you again in terms of, look, if I hadn't bumped into him on that platform, that tube station, like, there you go. None of this, I'm never here. So I never even tried to work in football. But if you love football and you focus on the desire to work on something that you really love, like I said earlier, good things, hopefully, hard work will meet the opportunity.
Right, quickfire questions. The 3 non-negotiables that you and the people around you would ideally buy into.
Hard work, absolutely fundamental. I bet you everyone who asks that, I bet you 50% must say hard work first up. Humility and open-mindedness. I talked about that in terms of, that's one of Thomas's big strengths that people don't see, I think, from the outside.
What's your greatest strength and your biggest weakness?
I think my biggest strength, it can also be my biggest weakness at times, which is, I think my biggest strength is I'm quite calm, level-headed, dispassionate, and analytical, and in many ways introverted. I'm not somebody who's out there all the time and doing lots of interviews and all the rest of it. I tend to be in the background. I think that can also be my biggest weakness, because, like I said, when we fail to get promoted, people want to see me, people want to see people going, oh, this is terrible, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Not necessarily somebody, they want to grieve and feel let down. They don't want somebody going just calm and a bit emotionless.
Yep. And
being a bit emotional, we talked already, football's an emotional sport. Being emotionless is, can be maybe also a weakness. And also being introverted means that I'm sometimes reluctant to do that job of stepping in front of people, in front of a whole team of people and going, right, this is how I see it. And I don't realise sometimes they want that as well. And, realising that when are those moments to step in and go, right, here's my vision of how we want to do it, and getting that balance right.
What does hard work mean to you?
Hard work means not cutting corners, I think. I've got 2 boys, and they're 11 and 8, and we do a maths homework. I'll do maths homework with them, and they're both not bad at maths, but they want to do what I used to do when I was a kid, which is they want to do everything in their head and write down the answer. And I say, no, you need to write out. The teacher, write your workings, write your workings. They used to say this to me all the time when I was a kid, all the time, write your workings, write your workings. No, I'll just do it in my head because you want to cut corners, right? I think the natural human desire is to want to cut corners and get to the end point as quickly as possible, because that's the end point. But if you don't put the steps in place and the foundations in place before you get there, the hard work to put those foundations in place, I think that's where you make mistakes. You make mistakes, and that's when you'll trip up.
What's the biggest misunderstanding or misconception about you?
I think about me, I think in general about Brentford, I think in the past it's been a little bit that we are focused completely on kind of stats and data and all this kind of stuff, and there's so much more to it, and you need such more broad skill set to actually be able to do the job. And I think that's, my background is as a statistician, a mathematician, so people automatically assume, well, that's what I deliver. Is, I come in with numbers and I say, here's the numbers, now get on with it. But actually, it takes a lot more than that. Some of which are natural skills, some of which I have to work quite hard on.
We have a high performance book club. We have many members and they love recommendations. Would you recommend a book for our members, please?
I will recommend a book. I haven't listened to all the podcasts, but I did listen to on my car on the way in earlier. I listened to your last one with Jordan Henson, which was fascinating, and you mentioned Kahneman, and that I'm going to mention that book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I'm certain you must have had that one come up in the past.
Yep.
And the reason I mention it is because there's been 2 books which Matthew has given out to his staff members and gone, right, you must read this. I've read this. You must read this. When it's been fresh and new, this book's obviously from quite a long time ago, but when you read it, you went, right, read that. Boom, this is exactly the sort of thinking which I want to see in my businesses outside of football, but also bring it into football. And there's so many concepts in Thinking Fast and Slow about things like anchoring, things like loss aversion, things like understanding that, just that the biases that we all hold. You see that all the time, the biases in some of the people you work with, and you see it coming out, and you think, God, this is, it's just like a theory played out in action. Things like the process that he talks about where he was involved in recruiting potential soldiers, I think, in the Israeli military, and captains and what they called, like officers in the Israeli military, and they tried to just have experts say, we observe this person, we think they're going to be an officer, and how bad that process was, and how unsuccessful it was, and how that parallels youth development in football and trying to really understand, is this player going to be a player or not, and how do you measure it, and can you predict it, and how hard that is. There's so many parallels between what he talks about there and what you see around football, in my opinion.
What advice would you give to a teenage Phil just starting out?
A teenage me, I think like a lot of young boys, it's I talked about already, cutting corners, and they want to just enjoy their life and cut corners, and the hard work's not necessarily there. I think as you get older, as you develop and become more mature, you start to realize how much effort and work you need to put in to be able to kind of do well and stay afloat almost in with other good people. And the more you hang around with good people who are doing well, the more it inspires you to work harder. So I think, that idea of hard work is just fundamental. And I think teenage boys, a lot of them, my kids, the same hard work.
Similar to the Marcus Waring comment where he said, if you hang around with shit, you'll turn into shit.
Absolutely.
There's another way of saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your final message, really, to our listeners who've really enjoyed this absorbing conversation for the last 90 minutes or so. What would you love to leave them with, ringing in their ears about how to live their own version of high performance?
We just talked about hard work, and that's fundamental, but I think humility, I think that's absolutely key, and that learning process, and surrounding yourself with good people. In football, you can't run a football club without surrounding yourself with really outstanding people. Obviously players, but people don't talk about the outstanding people that you need at all levels at the club. We talked about Christian Eriksen earlier, actually. He's a good example of when we signed Christian Eriksen, how much we relied on our medical department to do such a good job in that case. The work that had to go in to make sure we were happy with that signing. So what happens is he does well for us, and Brentford do well, and everyone goes, well, that was great from the coaches and the recruitment team. The medical team take a huge amount of credit for that. So be humble, realise your strengths and weaknesses, surround yourself with good people who complement that, but complement each other.
Brilliant.
Phil, thank you so much for your time. So good to get that insight into the humility in this place, the way you recruit people, the risks that you take, the cognitive diversity that's really important. My final question, are you a dreamer? Do you dream that there's something unbelievable around the corner for Brentford, or are you more about the fact that being here today where you are in the Premier League is special enough?
I don't think you can sit here and say being here where we are now is special enough, because as soon as we do that, I think that's where we'll start to fall backwards. I think you've always got to aspire to the next. How on earth do you get to the next level? Look at Brighton, what a great example they are, where even until a couple of years ago, they were a team who were more struggling at the bottom end, and they made some changes, and they've just gone on to a level where now they're just outstanding as a football team, and done it in a way which you can only, that's an inspiration to us to kind of mimic them. I Am I a dreamer? Not really. I think my job is to try and make that happen. That's pragmatic. But I think there's certainly a space within football for, and Thomas talks about it, the big dream, could we get in Europa League? That's the big dream. And I think you do have to have people who are dreamers and more emotionally motivated like that to kind of want to motivate that, whereas I'm more pragmatic and I've got to kind of think, well, actually, yeah, we've got to actually go and deliver it. So there's a role for both, I think.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Hey guys, it's Jake here. Listen, before you go, please do me just one favour. Hit subscribe. It makes such a difference to us. The more subscribers we get, then the bigger the channel becomes. The bigger the channel becomes, the bigger the names we can attract and the more impact we can have for you. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe right now.